Hello, thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to install a HxC floppy drive emulator into a Yamaha QX-1 sequencer from 1984. This is meant as not only an installation video, but also a bit of a primer on installing and configuring the HxC floppy drive. For this project, you'll need a Phillips head screwdriver, a standard 34-pin IDE cable, a 4-pin floppy power connector, some kind of conversion kit to convert a 3.5 floppy drive into a 5.25 floppy drive to fit in the bay of the QX-1, and of course you'll need your HxC FloppyEmulator. A Dremel tool would also be very useful. However, a industrial file will also do the job. This video deals with the HxC Revision F. The instructions here may also apply to other revisions. I have not tested them. However, I picked the Revision F because it fits nicely into a 3.5-inch bay, which will then fit nicely into our adapter. To open the QX-1, you'll need to remove 5 screws, 3 along the front lip, and 1 each on each side, right in the middle. But let's not open the QX-1 just yet. Next, let's focus in on this black panel. You're going to remove the 3 screws right in the center, positioned along the center line, as well as 2 screws outside the panel positioned to the upper right. And now for the moment we've all been waiting for. Let's open her up. I was astonished when I opened up my QX-1. It was literally the cleanest piece of retro electronics I've ever seen. There was no rust, no liquid damage, no dust, nothing. And I think I know why. Back in 1984, these things were top-of-the-line studio equipment retailing for almost $3,000, which in today's money is almost $7,000. And when you think about the mean income only being $15,000 in 1984, you can see why someone might take very, very good care of one of these. When researching these, I only found 2 for sale. One was on Reverb.com for about $300. Seemed pretty well taken care of, came with a flight case. However, I like to see what I can find on eBay. The ad for this QX-1 listed a few caveats. The first being that they had, quote, no equipment to test it with, but powers on. But my favorite being, quote, no software. The QX-1 doesn't need any external software to run. Its operating system is contained on an internal chip. So, it's always good to check the vocabulary on eBay listings, because many people, especially for obscure equipment like this, don't really know what they have. Anyway, let's get back to the installation. Remove the 2 screws near the back of the floppy drive, holding the mesh housing on top. Remove the screws you see here. To the bottom left and the middle right, you'll see 2 more screws holding the mesh housing on top of the floppy drive. The 4 outside of the floppy drive are attaching it to the bracket and the bottom of the unit. Disconnect the IDE cable from the circuit board. Remove the mesh housing from the top of the floppy drive. This will give you access to the back where the IDE and power cables connect. You don't need to bother disconnecting the IDE cable. It's not one that we can reuse in this project. It's only meant to connect to a 5.25 floppy drive. For reference, you do not need the bottom panel on the floppy drive for the rest of the installation. You can keep it attached and discard it. Remove the two brackets you see on the side of the floppy drive here. You're going to need them for mounting of our 5 1/4 drive bay. Now it's time to install the HxC floppy drive. Gather your power connector, your IDE cable, your 5 1/4 bay conversion, and your HxC floppy drive revision F. Attach your power connector. Now we're going to prepare our IDE cable. You might notice that the cable here is keyed, so not all 34 pins are available. However, on the circuit board for the QX-1, all 34 pins are present. They may not be used, but they're there. Luckily, on standard floppy cables, all of the connections are there, albeit one pin is covered up with plastic. What you're going to have to do is use something small that you can slowly drill a hole with. I used an eyeglass screwdriver. It was about the right size and got through. The hole doesn't need to be the exact size, just big enough for the pin to slip through. You will need to perform this surgery on both ends of the floppy cable. The HxC FloppyEmulator has all pins present as well to maximize compatibility across devices. Mount the HxC inside the 5 1/4 drive bay converter and attach the metal brackets that you removed earlier to the converter. The entire drive is now ready to be reinstalled into the QX-1. Attach the IDE and power cables to the back of the HxC, then to the motherboard and power supply respectively. At this point, we should be ready to close up the QX-1. But there's a problem. The 5 1/4 drive bay converter was really only meant for standard 5 1/4 drive bays in old computers, and not really in specialty equipment like this. So we've got a bit of a gap, and that just won't do. If you have a Dremel tool, now is going to be a great time to use it. If you don't have one, we're going to have to do things the manual way, like I did. Unfortunately, my Dremel broke right before I made this video. You're going to want to remove any plastic above the front panel of the floppy emulator. Then you can use the top of the floppy emulator as a level to shave off any excess on the left or right. Okay, looks good. Let's finish closing up the QX-1. Replace those 5 screws that we removed at the beginning of the video. You may notice some screws missing on and around the black panel. Those screws were there to secure the floppy drive brackets, which are no longer inside, so don't worry about it. Now it's time to configure the HxC floppy drive. There's plenty of documentation on the website, however, it's not very well organized, and there really isn't much of a tutorial besides just reading through a giant PDF. Hopefully you'll get a basic understanding of how the HxC floppy drive emulator works and how to format an SD card for use inside of it. This process is only for the Yamaha QX-1. However, you can use the knowledge presented for formatting the card for other devices. If you've come this far, I'm going to assume that you know how to format an SD card to FAT32 format. If you haven't done that, do that first. You may also want to update the firmware of the HxC floppy drive before proceeding. I'll include a link for that in the description. What you're seeing on the screen is the FloppyEmulator Software, which you can download on the HxC website. I'll include a link for that as well. The first thing you want to do is go to Settings. This is where you tell the floppy drive what kind of floppy drive to emulate. So copy the settings you see in yellow. Next, you're going to go to Load Raw Image. This is where you create a virtual floppy image to put on the SD card for your device to use, in this case our QX-1. So copy these as well, then create empty floppy and close. The floppy will then be loaded into the software. Now you're going to export the loaded floppy image to your SD card. Once you've done this, you're ready to use the SD card in the floppy emulator. So now we have a blank floppy image ready for the QX-1 to format. So let's go through that process. It's a little strange and it's going to seem like you're doing things wrong. So I've taken the liberty of filming the whole process so you'll know that this is just the way it's supposed to happen. Let's boot up the QX-1 with the SD card in the emulator. It's going to say conflict disk, but don't worry, you didn't do anything wrong. You just want to hit enter. Then make sure you hit yes, so you have to hit shift down. There are two different shifts on the QX-1. So hold shift down and hit the transport button. You should now see the display say executing now. At this point, you should see your HxC FloppyEmulator formatting. What you're seeing on screen represents what the device would be doing to an actual floppy disk. So it's going through track by track, formatting it. Now, what's going to happen here is it's going to error out, or it's going to look like it errors out. So I'm going to cut the music so you can hear what that sounds like. Let's fast forward to the first time it errors out. So what just happened there? Not really too sure, but it's going to happen again, and then something kind of weird is going to happen. Yep, now it's going faster, and this will be the last time. So it's going to make that sound one more time, and then your floppy is basically formatted. Now the QX-1 is going to ask you to name the disk. And there you go. You're officially ready to start using your Yamaha QX-1. And that brings us to the end of my video. Hopefully this was informative. Hopefully you got an idea on what the HxC emulator is and what it can do for devices that use outdated 5 1/4 and 3.5 floppy drives. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Until next time, stay classy, synth fans.